Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today, I bring you a story centered around Hùng and Hua, a story that begins with things that are very familiar, very ordinary. It was a day that, on the surface, anyone would have thought was simply a peaceful day like so many others. Yet it was from that very calmness that a major upheaval quietly emerged, setting off a chain of changes no one could have foreseen, and causing the lives of many people to turn in a completely different direction. That afternoon, the sun was not too harsh, and a gentle breeze drifted across the yard in front of the house. After a simple lunch, Hùng and Hua cleared away the dishes together. There were no elaborate words, no special arrangements, everything unfolded naturally, like a routine repeated over many years of living together. Hùng took advantage of his rare day off to help his wife tidy up the yard, pulling out weeds that had crept onto the path, then bending down to repair the animal pens behind the house. Hua bustled about beside him, sometimes sweeping the yard, sometimes bringing him water. They exchanged gentle glances and casual remarks, small gestures filled with quiet care. The atmosphere at that moment was truly serene. The soft rustling of the broom against the ground, the clucking of chickens in their coop, and the wind whispering through the trees by the gate all came together to create a simple yet warmly intimate family scene. These were rare moments that both Hùng and Hua deeply cherished, for amid the pressures of daily life, they did not always have the chance to be together, sharing such small but affectionate tasks. As Hùng bent down to tie a few wooden slats in the pen, still thinking about what else he could finish later that afternoon, the sudden ringing of a phone shattered the quiet. The abrupt sound made him flinch slightly. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and reached for the phone resting on the stone table in the yard. The screen lit up with the name Tieu. In that instant, an indescribable feeling rose within Hùng. He could not explain why, but seeing that name at that moment made his heart sink slightly. He answered the call quickly, and before he could say a word, sobbing broke out on the other end of the line. Tieu's voice trembled and broke apart, as if she were trying to hold herself together but could not. Each choked sob echoed through the phone, instantly putting Hùng on edge. Tieu spoke in panic, her words disordered, her breathing short and hurried. She said that Hai had been arrested by the police for investigation. That single sentence was enough to leave Hùng stunned. He stood frozen for several seconds, the phone trembling slightly in his hand, as if all the sounds around him had slowed to a blur. The wind, the animals, even Hua calling out to him from behind faded into the background. All that remained in Hung's mind were Tieu's words and her unceasing sobs on the other end of the line. A clear sign that the peaceful afternoon they had just shared was no longer whole as it had been before. Hùng took a deep breath, trying his best to keep his voice as calm as possible. He knew that if he lost control now, Tieu on the other end of the line would only become more frightened. Gently, he asked her to calm herself, to breathe slowly, and to recount everything clearly, from beginning to end, without leaving out any details. He spoke deliberately, word by word, as if guiding Tieu out of the panic that was overwhelming her. Through sobs that had not yet subsided, Tieu began to explain what had happened. Her voice was choked with emotion, at times trembling so badly that she could barely finish a sentence. She said that Hai's company had been investigated by the authorities and accused of long-term tax evasion. These violations were no longer rumors or suspicions. They had been exposed, forcing Hai, as the person in charge and the one bearing primary responsibility, to cooperate with the police during the investigation. Each time she mentioned Hai's name, Tieu's voice cracked again, filled with undisguised fear and helplessness. Tieu said everything had happened too fast, so fast that neither she nor Hai's mother had any time to react. From the moment they received the news, the two of them could only sit there in confusion, staring at each other, not knowing where to begin or what they could possibly do to help Hai in this situation. Tieu's tears fell endlessly, each sob heavy, as if all her worries, fears, and pressure had poured into that single moment. In her desperation, she begged Hùng for help, because at that point, he was the only person she could think of, the rare pillar of support she believed she could still cling to. After listening to everything, Hùng fell silent for a few seconds. He did not respond right away, but his mind was already organizing every piece of information Tieu San had just shared. He understood that this was no small matter, and certainly not something that could be resolved in a day or two. Even so, the first feeling that rose in his heart was not hesitation or avoidance, but a clear determination that he could not stand aside. For Hùng, once it involved people he cared about, turning his back was never an option, especially when they were trapped in such chaos and fear. Hùng reassured Tieu San with a firmer tone. He told her to do her best to stay calm and not let fear break her down, because the more panicked she became, the more tangled everything would be. He said that the immediate priority was to stabilize her emotions, and that everything else could be dealt with step by step later. His words were not flowery, nor did he make grand promises, but they carried a sense of steadiness and responsibility that allowed Tieu San to feel somewhat more at ease. After ending the call, Hùng stood quietly in the yard for a moment. The surroundings were unchanged, the familiar courtyard, the unfinished animal pens, the midday sunlight still falling across every corner, yet the sense of peace from earlier was gone. Hùng turned to look at Lythica, his expression darkened. Just from her husband's face, Lythica could tell that something was wrong. Without needing much explanation, Hùng briefly told her what had happened, then asked her to go with him to Tieu San's place to help comfort her and her mother. Hùng reminded Lythica to be gentle, not to bombard them with questions, just to stay by their side and offer reassurance so Tieu San and Hai's mother would feel less afraid. He said that at this moment, the most important thing was for everyone to remain calm and not let emotions overpower reason. As for dealing with what came next, Hùng said he would take responsibility and handle things step by step. After speaking, he glanced once more at the yard, as if imprinting the peaceful moment that had just slipped away, before he and Lythica prepared to leave, stepping into a series of days whose challenges even he could not yet fully imagine. After making sure that all necessary matters had been properly arranged, Hùng did not allow himself to hesitate for even a moment longer. He understood very clearly that, in a situation like this, every passing minute carried unpredictable consequences. It was not only Hai's fate hanging in the balance, but also the anxiety and unease of those outside who were waiting day and night for news. That awareness compelled Hùng to act swiftly, decisively, and more cautiously than ever. The first thing Hùng did was proactively contact a lawyer with extensive experience in economic and criminal cases. The discussion took place the very same day, without delay or hesitation. Hùng laid out everything he knew, from the initial information Tieu San had shared to the details Hai had mentioned during their earlier call. Every word Hùng spoke was carefully considered, each timeline and each fact was recalled with precision. He understood that in cases like this, even a small mistake or omission could lead to consequences that might be impossible to undo. After meeting with the lawyer, Hùng proceeded with the necessary procedures to request a visit with Hai. When the door of the visiting room closed behind him, the atmosphere inside felt far heavier than Hùng had imagined. Hai sat across from him, his frame noticeably thinner, his face marked by exhaustion after days of relentless pressure. His eyes revealed tension and unease, even though he tried to maintain as much composure as possible. With just a brief glance, Hùng could tell that Hai was carrying an immense psychological burden on his shoulders. In Hung's presence, Hai neither avoided the truth nor attempted to hide or justify anything. He slowly recounted the entire course of events, detail by detail, as if finally releasing the weight that had pressed on his heart for so long. In his words were traces of fatigue, helplessness, and deep concern about the consequences he might have to face. Hùng listened intently, never interrupting, only occasionally nodding as he carefully absorbed and memorized every piece of information Hai provided. Through Hai's account, the full picture of the case gradually became clearer. Over a long period of time, it turned out, one of the company's accountants had secretly falsified the books, meticulously altering tax-related documents. The numbers were arranged skillfully enough to pass through many routine inspections. The amount of tax evaded was significant, yet the methods were so discreet that nothing was discovered for a long time. When signs of scrutiny from the authorities finally emerged, the accountant fled immediately, leaving all the legal consequences to fall squarely on Hai, the head of the company and the person bearing the highest legal responsibility. Hearing this, Hùng could not hide his deep contemplation. He understood that Hai's position was now extremely disadvantageous. On paper, all the initial evidence appeared to be working against him. As the legal representative of the company, Hai had very little leverage unless the truth behind those manipulated figures could be uncovered. This realization only deepened Hung's awareness of how serious the situation was and of the responsibility he carried in supporting Hai. After the visit ended, Hung quickly returned to work with the lawyer. Based on the newly obtained information, he asked the lawyer to proceed with the necessary procedures to apply for Hai's release on bail. The purpose was not to evade or avoid responsibility, but to gain the time needed to gather evidence, thoroughly review all records, and clarify the true role of each individual involved. Hung knew very well that only when the entire truth was fully and clearly exposed would Hai have a chance to prove that he was not the one who directly committed those violations. At the same time, Hung refused to wait passively for legal results. He actively coordinated with relevant units and began tracing every lead Hai had provided about the accountant who had fled. From seemingly minor details such as daily habits and personal relationships to remaining financial traces, everything was examined with meticulous care. With many years of experience in law enforcement, Hung understood that fugitives rarely disappear completely. No matter how carefully they hide, they always leave traces. It is only a matter of time and method. Thanks to his solid investigative skills and an extensive network of contacts across multiple regions, Hung gradually narrowed down the area where the accountant was likely hiding. Each piece of information was cross-checked, each clue connected, forming an increasingly clear picture. In the end, all those traces led Hung to an area near the Cambodian border, where the man was attempting to hide, hoping to evade the authorities. The arrest was carried out swiftly and discreetly, leaving no room for error. When apprehended, the accountant could no longer maintain his earlier composure. Faced with clear and convincing evidence, he was forced to confess to all of his crimes, from falsifying financial records and committing long-term tax evasion to fleeing in an attempt to avoid responsibility. These confessions were fully documented, becoming crucial links in the process of clarifying the case. As for Hung, as each piece of the puzzle gradually fell into place, he maintained his familiar calm, knowing that what had just unfolded was only one part of a much longer journey still ahead. As all the evidence was gradually pieced together, as each fragment of scattered information was placed side by side and aligned with clarity, and as the confession of the person directly responsible for the wrongdoing fully matched what the authorities had quietly gathered throughout the investigation, the truth was finally brought to light. The suspicions that had surrounded Hai for so long, suspicions that had forced him to live in constant anxiety and exhaustion, were lifted layer by layer. He no longer had to bear accusations that were never truly his, nor was he left in a position where he had to defend himself against acts he had never committed. The moment his innocence was officially confirmed meant far more to Hai than a simple legal conclusion. It was the instant he most clearly felt that he had escaped a long, suffocating nightmare, a period in which every passing day felt like a relentless test of his spirit and willpower. Sleepless nights, endless thoughts about the future, about his family, about his personal honor, all of it still lingered vividly in his mind. For that reason, being cleared did not only restore his name in the eyes of the law, but also allowed him, little by little, to breathe again and to return to being the person he once was. When Tieu San heard that Hai had been exonerated, she could hardly contain her emotions. All the worry, fear, tension, and pressure she had endured for so long seemed to burst forth at once. The days spent living in constant unease, when every phone call made her heart tighten, when even a message from an unfamiliar number was enough to startle her, now poured out in uncontrollable tears. Tears streamed down her face, but no longer those of despair or panic. They were tears of relief, of finally releasing a heavy burden that had pressed on her heart for far too many days. Tieu San was nearly speechless. She broke down and cried, allowing her emotions to flow freely after so long forcing herself to stay strong, to stand firm as emotional support for Hai's mother and for herself. In that moment, all the restraint and all the hidden fears were released, leaving behind a strange emptiness, one that felt far lighter and more bearable than before. As for Hai, although he tried to maintain his familiar composure, the deep emotion in his eyes was impossible to hide. What had happened was the greatest shock of his life, forcing him to confront the fear of losing everything, the career he had built with so much effort, his personal reputation, and the trust of those closest to him. There were moments when even Hai himself had doubted whether he had the strength to make it through. In such circumstances, Hung's presence and support became an invaluable anchor. Hung was not only the one who stepped forward to help on the legal front, but also the one who quietly stayed by his side, patiently pursuing the truth and gradually untangling knots that had once seemed impossible to undo. Hai did not hide his gratitude toward Hung, a gratitude that did not need many words, but was clearly shown in the way he looked at him, listened to him, and cherished everything Hung had done. To Hai, it was not merely help in a difficult time, but the loyalty and compassion of someone willing to stand beside him at his weakest. Hung accepted that appreciation in silence. He did not say much, nor did he consider what he had done to be anything extraordinary. To him, it was simply responsibility, something he believed he ought to do when he saw others trapped in hardship and in need of a helping hand. Even so, deep down, Hung understood that this ordeal had left significant marks on the lives of everyone involved. What had happened would not simply fade away as if it had never existed, nor would it be easy for everything to return exactly to how it once was. Gradually, things settled down, at least on the surface. The urgent calls no longer came one after another, and the long, tense days of waiting for news slowly came to an end. Life seemed to return to its familiar rhythm, as everyone resumed their work and daily routines. Yet beneath that calm, each person could clearly feel that after this upheaval, things had changed. Thoughts became more cautious, relationships were re-examined from a different perspective, and even future choices began to be shaped by what they had just endured. So how will the lives of Hung, Lythica, Hai, and Tieu San continue after those turbulent days? Where will these quiet inner changes lead them, and have the challenges ahead truly come to an end? Or are there still trials waiting beyond? Stay tuned for the next episode to find out what happens next in the story.
Xin chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình. Nhiều khi kiểu mọi người, hẹn gặp lại mọi người ở video sau.